Good evening, Madam Mayor, members of the council. Before you this evening is an item related to a request from Brian and Victoria Leffingwell regarding the construction of a single-family home on a piece of property that they own on North Mountain View Road. They have applied for a building permit to construct that single-family home and in essence are in that process today. As is the case in all developments of land within the city of Moscow, we take a look at the infrastructure that is around the facility, around the site, to determine if any improvements are necessary to serve the facility or to complete a street frontage that may border the property itself. So in this case, and looking at the Leffingwell's property, and I'll help orient you here just a bit. We're on North Mountain View, F Street here, the Aquatic Center and the Herc located on this side. The Leffingwell's property is there on the west side of Mountain View. Zoom in a bit. A long, narrow parcel, but it does include frontage on Mountain View here, a portion of which is partially improved right in this southern piece of the land, essentially with a widened road section, a bicycle lane, and curb and gutter. There's no sidewalk on that particular section or on the west side of Mountain View north of F, and continuing on north on out of the town. So as we look at the development proposal for the property and look at the city's requirements pertaining to frontage improvements, as would typically be the case, we would look at this site and say, well, there is undeveloped or incomplete, if you will, road frontage along the eastern edge of the property and would require that the frontage be completed to city standards as part of the development process. So normally that would involve the widening of the roadway to the full road standard, the installation of curb and gutter and sidewalk, and then any drainage or utilities that might be necessary to accommodate that. Excuse me. This particular site raises an interesting question that we don't often encounter, which has to do with the requirement for properties to develop a street that is above and beyond a residential street nature. Most single-family homes that are developing on a parcel of land that are not included in a previously completed subdivision are done on local level streets, residential level streets, which generally have a smaller cross-section than we would see on a minor arterial, such as Mountain View, or on a collector street. So it does raise the question about what is the onus upon that property owner as they are developing a piece of residential property for a single-family home with regard to what would be considered a larger and wider street section than might otherwise be seen by properties of a similar nature throughout the community. So in discussions with the Leffingwells, there was some concern about the extent of the improvements, and staff reviewed this and were in agreement with the Leffingwells that perhaps something less than an arterial standard construction should be required as part of the home development, and that the city should participate in what would in essence be the difference, if you will. Now this is, it's interesting ground for us because this is something we don't encounter very often with respect to single-family development. Typically when we're working along arterials, they are subdivisions, commercial developments, things of a more significant nature in terms of development size. And so the improvement to the arterial standard makes sense in terms of the impact that that development is having on the roadway and the associated issues that go with that. So what we have before you this evening is we're looking for confirmation by the City Council on a development agreement that would allow the Leffingwells to move forward with their single-family home construction. The development agreement would stipulate that the Leffingwells would be responsible for certain improvements along the frontage of their property. In this case, the curb and gutter, the sidewalk, and then the minor drainage work that would be necessary dealing with their driveway approach that would be included within that frontage. The city, in this case, per our recommendation, would be responsible for what is, in essence, a fairly minor road widening section that deals with a taper of the roadway, which I failed to point out here a moment ago. So I'll back up one step. Where the existing curb line ends, the asphalt tapers from a 36-foot wide section to about a 24-foot wide section right through this area right here. And so in order to construct the curb line at the full 36-foot width, it will be outside the existing asphalt area. And so the proposal before you would be that the city would be responsible for that road base and asphalt work to extend that existing asphalt edge out to where the curb line would be when the Leffing well is constructed under this development agreement. So that's the concept before you. The Leffing Wells have reviewed the idea. They've taken a look at the development agreement in its draft form. So I understand it. They're amenable to this, these conditions and this proposal. And so staff recommendation is that we move forward with the development agreement with these conditions and requirements that the property develop these frontage improvements within a time certain. I believe it was 9 months within the development agreement.
Thank you, Les. Wayne?
Gary, go ahead.
Oh, Gary, did you have something to add to that?
Yes, I would note that this was not reviewed by committee. That is unfortunate. The Leffing Wells had poured a foundation. We're attempting to accommodate, just trying to move the project forward. This is a standard development agreement rather than have the applicant wait 3 weeks when they were allowed to move forward with the foundation. This seemed to be the sensible thing to do. I would also note that Les's explanation is correct in that when you have the way our streets or our development agreements work, it is based on the impact of the development on the adjacent public improvements. So that's why the residential street standard is the reason that it was utilized in this case. Once you have a single-family dwelling on an arterial street, then the impacts obviously are a little different than a single-family dwelling on a purely residential street. And that's why the improvements that have been negotiated have been approved by Public Works and Community Development as being the most appropriate in this case.
Thank you. Wayne?
Les, what are the plans for Mountain View north of their residential area where it turns into 24 feet rural? What are our plans for Mountain View? We've been improving it all along up to F Street, or up to actually the Aquatic Center.
Please.
The current plans for Mountain View, there really are two projects that are in the works. They are not north of this site. They are the two at the south end from State Highway 8 up to White Avenue, which we're designing and funding in-house. And then the second piece, which would go from White Avenue up to 6th Street, which is a grant-funded project scheduled for, I believe, 2015. That work will then complete the widening on the south end, if you will, from F Street all the way down to State Highway 8. And so then after that, I suspect our next target for improvements would be continuing from F Street to the north. So with that said, it's likely that we would not see a city-funded project in this area of Mountain View and probably at least until after 2015. We do not have anything on the books right now to address this section of Mountain View.
Please.
Well, my concern lies in that we're asking them to spend $11,000 to do improvements where we've been doing improvements all along Mountain View at no cost to the individual property owners. And if we were to continue on north and improve Mountain View with the same theory that the property owners would not be charged in the future as we improve Mountain View and it moves into 36-foot width, including sidewalks, curbs, and gutters, they would be the only ones that had to spend $11,000 out of their pocket to do what the city's been doing for everybody else.
If I could respond
if I may, well, I was going to address that as well, but
Okay, well, you can be next.
Okay.
Gary?
Yeah, it's the city's policy that if you develop adjacent to a substandard street, that you will participate in the improvement of that street. And that Mountain View has, it's in the code, excuse me. That code has been followed all along Mountain View. If you recall, the Windfall Hills project was intended to be, because it's subdivision, was slated to essentially take care of half of Mountain View Road along the frontage of its property. The developer decided not to move ahead. We had already designed it and had participated with city funding for that. everybody who has built along Mountain View that has been ready to go in advance of a city project has had to pay in or has had to improve Mountain View Road. It just so happens that as the city systematically is biting off chunks of Mountain View, if people aren't ready to go, or if they just want to wait until the city, if and when they get there to improve it, then they can take advantage of that. So the policy and the code has been followed in virtually every case. And of course, that's a discussion that took place here as well. If the applicant wanted to move ahead with a request for waiver, then they could come ahead and ask the council to waive the requirement as well. And the council gets a few of those waivers every couple of years and considers those. But the policy and the code has been followed.
Les, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, if I may. Gary's exactly right. That has been the approach that we have taken. Another example, or a couple of examples, the Rolling Hills developments that took place around 6th Street, all those frontage improvements along there were done as part of those developments. Again, those are larger scale. But another smaller one is down near White Avenue on the northeast quadrant, just north of the mini storage. There's a kind of a little commercial building back in there. And that development, when it occurred, they paid in lieu of making improvements, they paid into the city. And then when the city did the White Avenue area project, that money that they paid in went towards, in essence, their share of frontage along the way. So it has been our policy that any type of development that occurs along that roadway does participate. Either they build it or they pay money in lieu of. If you happen to be in an area that was developed some years prior, some of those divisions where that was the case, then, you know, and those improvements were not required back in the 70s or 80s or something like that, the city has come along and made those improvements later. You may be in, there are a few parcels of land that do not have improvements upon them today that we have made improvements in front of those. It's a matter of timing. It's just like any street project that we do, somebody lucks out, if you will, and that they've not had to front a cost because we got there first.
Okay, Dan?
Just a question. Will the city develop the east side of Mountain View for the same distance? Is that part of this?
That is
Plan.
not part of this plan. They would just do their frontage on the west
Just
side.
on so it's all going to be on the west side, the extension. It doesn't seem to bottleneck as much on that side, but if you're extending sidewalks, it seemed like a.
Right, and the issue on the west side, you know, as you're heading southbound, you'll be going from a narrow section to a wider section.
Right.
So where that begins really is not, you know, a big factor. You have more space at that point. It does extend the bicycle lane a little bit further north on that westerly edge of the roadway. In time, you know, the city will come back and look at going on. You know, as I mentioned earlier, some of those older subdivisions like this one, these are all developed lots, right? But the frontage improvements here weren't required in those days. So in time, the city will need to come along, and if we want to continue our policy that we've been following for the last 10 years or so to improve Mountain View, then the city will come along in some manner and widen this roadway section.
Tim?
Thank you, Mayor Cheney. Mr. McDonald, will the taper continue to the north of the Leffenwells property, or will it just kind of dead end right there? And
To be honest with you, we haven't actually gotten to that level of detail on how the asphalt will be laid out, but typically what occurs in those situations is we would include a taper from the north edge of the Leffingwell property to some distance to the north. We would have to determine exactly what that taper length would be. The work that the city is responsible for, we are looking to have actually the city crews perform. So really what we're looking at is labor and then some material cost. I think the dollar amount that was in the CCSR package is at less than $1,000. So it's a fairly minor material cost for the city.
thank you.
Walter?
I think Tom may have had his before I got mine up.
I was just going
Thank you.
to,
Tom?
thanks, Walter. I was just going to say I'm happy to see a few more feet of sidewalk going in along along a road in Moscow, and was going to express support for it and hope that we can move it forward.
Walter?
Just to make sure I understand, Les, we will have a section of sidewalk along this Leffingwell project that ends at their north property line and ends at their south property line.
That is correct.
And the curb line on the west side of Mountain View the mayor back up. I'm afraid I'm going to get her with this. The curb line, this curb line will be extended in a straight fashion to create a future 36-foot width, which is what we have right here.
That is correct, to their north property line.
So we're not giving up any design width of Mountain View in this. We're just participating in a little bit of the widening cost because of the aforementioned residential reasons.
That's correct.
Okay.
How would the council like to proceed? Tim?
Mayor Cheney, I'll move that we approve the development agreement for the public improvements related to the construction of the Leffenwell single-family residence and authorize you as mayor to sign the agreement.
Second.
Okay, we have Tim's motion and Tom's second. Is there further discussion? Sue?
Thank you, Mayor Cheney. I think this is a really good idea because, A, we're not giving up the width that is needed for a minor arterial. We're not saying, okay, go ahead and we'll just build it the size of a residential street and they'll have to come back and do it again later. And the second thing reason why this is good is that we don't have a policy for single lot LIDs. And I know as you go along Mountain View, there are other people that will have single lot extensions, areas where they would need to put in these improvements, which are really onerous if you have a long lot or in a corner lot or something like this. So I think this is a good compromise. And if you look down on F Street in your little picture, you'll see there's three houses that have a sidewalk that stops. So we're just continuing to go along, and this is a good compromise.
Okay. Other discussion before voting? Okay. Does anyone need the motion repeated? Are you good to go? Okay. We'll start the roll call vote with you, Tim.
Aye.
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 Okay, the motion carries. Thank you, Les, for your presentation.
You're welcome.